Hi and welcome back to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you had a beautiful day no matter what it is you've been doing. For today's free wire tutorial here on YouTube, I'd like to share with you a technique to create your very own connector made out of a single piece of 18 gauge or 1mm round wire, and I'm going to create it in the shape of a feather because I just like how they look. Now if you squint a bit, that might even be a leaf. You could make stylised little alterations and create that connector exactly how you want it to look. I'm going to take you down to the board now and show you a little bit closer of what we're going to make together today. So I've put together a complete necklace featuring a feather drop down at the bottom, some segments of purple lepidolite quartz in rosary link design, and then 4 of these little feather connectors. So I made 2 slightly larger ones, 2 slightly smaller ones, just to graduate in this necklace design. I'm just going to show you the basics of how to create a double hoop ended connector in the shape of a feather. So this is probably not the best shirt to wear it with, but you get the idea. Having the graduated sizes, it's quite an attractive piece. So this is one of the slightly smaller ones, one of the slightly larger ones. It's about 1 inch, the size of the feather, and then this one's about 2 inches. You could make a whole strand of them and just have them as a wall decoration, or just have small ones with a bead off the bottom as a decorative pair of earring drops. So this is what I'm going to show you how to create today. And we're going to be working with 1mm round wire, that's equivalent to 18 gauge, and I'm working in raw copper. Now I have around about 18 inches of wire here, which seems quite a lot, and it is quite a lot, and that's because I'm going to make quite a large piece to show you on the camera. As always, I'm going to run that between thumb and forefinger to make sure that that's nice and warm. About 18 inches or so, what I'm going to do is find approximately the halfway point and just put a sharp right angle bend in there. I'm then going to use my round nose pliers to create my first loop form down at the bottom. So if I pop those round nose pliers in just below that angle and then rotate the end around. You can do that in one move if you prefer. I've done that in small moves so I don't twang the camera and the lighting. Pull that tail all the way around and cross it over the upright and then withdraw. So I've made an oversized hoop here. If I'm making for earrings, I would certainly make that a much smaller shape. I'm trying to make it a little bit larger so it's easier to see. So the thing I'm going to do next is to grip hold of that round form without touching where the wires cross over. Take that tail all the way around the neck of the wire, and then draw that around and around and around until I've got around about 3 wraps going on. Now you could make that much longer or much shorter. A single wrap is sufficient for that to work, but you could do that with multiple wraps. I will try and get the same number of wraps at the other end of the design when we get there to offer an element of symmetry. However, that is not exactly necessary, you don't have to do that. What I'm doing here is just centralising that round form, the connector shape, giving that a bit of a gentle squeeze just to make sure that the shape is set, and then I'm very gently going to just tighten up that coil. I'm going to grip hold via the coil and draw one of the sides out. This was the central core section, so I'm pulling that out to one side and just drawing that round, and then I'm bringing the other side in. So one was straight up and is now gently swooshing out. The other was in a direct line going over that way, and that's now also coming up to reflect the arc on the opposite side. I'm just going to spend a second to tidy that up before I bring them both around. Now for this to work for me, I like to use my bent chain nose pliers, but I also like to bring in a second pair of chain nose pliers. I'll show you for why. So I'm going to make this quite large and exaggerated so it's easier to see the sizes on the camera. However, you can size this down. So the first thing I'm going to do is to grab hold of one of those sides and push that out at an angle, like so, and then repeat on the opposite side. Now you can use either of your bent chain nose or your chain nose pliers for this. I'm going to draw that down. I'm then just going to draw these central shapes at the bottom up so that they start to replicate a swooshing, arcing around feel. What I want to do now is to draw these angles really, really close to the base wire that we're working on. So this is our base on either side, and then we're just going to bring that over. Now I'm very, very gently closing that up, but leaving a good gap in there. The reason I'm going to leave a gap will become apparent. Same on the other side, just draw that around so that those two elongated end sections are now coming down and away. I'll then switch to my chain nose pliers. These have got a lovely tapered tip to them. I'm going to make a much smaller bend. Now, as a rule of thumb, it needs to be half the distance from the last point here to here, less than half of that distance before we start turning that back up again. Same on both sides. So it could be quite a small amount, it could be around about half, it's entirely up to you. Once you start playing with the design, you'll see how that starts to come together. So if I just drop that down for a second, you can see that we've got a really weird squashed M looking thing, which is not what we want to end up with. So the next stage of the design is to close up the inner loop that we've created. We've got a loop coming up, whoosh, and then one at the bottom coming back up again. So to close this up, when you're working with multiple strands of wire that you're drawing together, I'm just going to support underneath that hook with my hand and then draw that completely closed. And doing so in small movements will make a much neater design. Once I have that closed up, I'm just going to straighten it. I actually prefer my bent chain nose pliers because they've got a broader base to them. Same on the other side, so I'm supporting underneath the design, and you can see the mark on my hand shows how tightly I clench that piece. So I'm going to draw that closed and then give it a squeeze, keeping those two wires parallel to one another. The wire will want, because it's easier for it, to slide down underneath, but the reason that your hand goes underneath is just to support that like so. Now, closing the second section up by hand is easier to begin with, so just drawing those in nice and tight. For the next part, we're going to have 3 pieces of wire side by side, and if you do this clenching underneath, one of those pieces of wire will rotate and twist around, and it will weaken the whole design, and it will also mean that you perhaps won't be able to rescue it. So where I'm placing my flat pliers, my chain nose pliers now, is over 3 strands of wire, but not covering that bottom loopy section. So I'm supporting where it comes, if I show you on the opposite side, I'm supporting across here and here. Around about half of that section is supported with the secondary set of pliers. So what I need to do now is, in small movements, close up that looped section, like so. And it is really small movements, you might need to adjust the pliers, small movements, and then get that last little squeeze to close up. So you can see now that you've got those 3 pieces of wire are all parallel to one another. So what I'm going to do is just take a second to tidy that up and make sure I'm happy with the aesthetic of it, and I get the chance to just flatten that out slightly. Now what I've done there is twisted the wires over, and I'm showing you that because this is what happens if you don't use the secondary set of pliers. It will want to twist up. Now in doing so, that side of the design has become weak. So I'm going to show you with the pliers on the other side, supporting at the top, and then slowly closing up that section at the bottom. Small movements, bit by bit. You can take a second to just make sure that they're side by side. You can grip the majority of it and then close those loops up. And in keeping those pliers in, you stop the twisting from occurring. So by hand, I will bring those up so that they're starting to sit and look a little bit like this. I'm going to do another round of that manoeuvre, and then I'll show you how to close it up at the top. So I'm going to use the broader side, my broader set of pliers. So down at the base of my bent chain nose pliers, it's quite a wide section. So I'm going to push that outwards, flip the design over, sorry about the noise, push that outwards. You can, if you want to, measure that to make sure that they're perfectly symmetrical. I'm not exactly going to worry. If you want to make that a little bit more symmetrical, you absolutely can. So I'm just going to support the upright section and draw that tail back around. Close but not closed. I'll do that on both sides, like so. And then I'm going to switch to my slightly smaller pliers to bring less than half at maximum, the distance between this loop and this loop, turn that back in the opposite direction. So you're creating little S-bends, as it were. And again, you can measure these if you want to make sure that they're exactly symmetrical. What I'm going to do is close up the first section. Now, if you want to use pliers for this, you absolutely can. But when you've got the two pieces of wire coming together, it's less tricky. But if you want to be absolutely sure, you can. It does make life easier if you don't mind picking up the pliers and putting them down again all the time. So I'm just going to support over the base there, and then close up the inner of those two looped sections or hairpin racetrack sections first. If you do that closing up section before you put this second bend in, it's really quite difficult to get in and create that bend. Hence, doing the two bends and leaving them soft before moving on to the next part. When you close those up by hand, you can just open the wire up at the top if you want to. What I'm going to do is again clasp all three sections of wire side by side and then close up the outer of those two hairpin racetrack bends. Now that has twisted despite the fact that I'm holding it with pliers, because I tried to do too much in one go. So I always leave my mistakes in to show you how easy it is to make them and how it's simply practice that will get this better. So what I would do to fix that is give that a really good squash to make it nice and flat again, and then do much smaller movements, taking away the gap at a much slower rate. Don't rush it, and it will become a neater finish. So if I pop those pliers over all three sections of the wire, so I'm supporting just on the opposite side, this is where I'll be supporting. And then if I draw that down slightly so there's less of the looped section sticking out, draw that together, small movement, retract the pliers, small movement, take a look, small movement. That's ever so slightly lifted, but it's nowhere near as bad as it was when you rush it. So what I shall do now is just continue along up to the top of the feather, or potentially leaf design if you prefer, and then I can show you how to join that connector together at the top to create a matching loop. So here's a piece that I've spent a little bit more time creating slightly more evenly. You may notice that it's flared at the bottom, like so, and then very gently I've just put a little bit of curve and then drawn that in so that my feather is fatter at the bottom and then narrows up towards the top. So we've got all the sides have been done and I've shaped it how I want it to look. What I need to do now is to create that loop up at the top. So I'm just going to draw those shoulders slightly in together so that they cross over. And when I've decided whereabouts I want them to cross over, I think around about there, I'll turn one of those into an upright, like so. And I'll take the other wire across. So if we're looking at it like so, I've got one at 12 o'clock and one will cross over either at 9 or 3 o'clock. The one that's crossing over is underneath. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to clasp hold of that wire just past where that bend occurs and draw the tail upwards. So if I show you what that looks like, you can see there's a little bit of straight line before the bend comes upwards and away. What I'm going to do now is to support both of those shoulder sections in my bent chain nose pliers. I'm not pressing very, very hard anywhere where wires cross one over the other. So I'm going to take the tail over the top and wrap that around. Let's go for 1.5 times. So if you have a front, if you have a side which you think is slightly neater, at the moment they both look almost as neat as one another. So what I'm going to do is elect to trim away this small tail of wire, and this was 18 inches of wire to create this piece. So you can see it is quite wire hungry for the size of the finished piece. And I'm just going to carefully and gently tighten that coil up because I left that a little bit loose. Squash that tail down into position and rotate the pliers around to tighten that up. So then we just need to add a loop at the top. So I'm going to take my chain nose pliers, pop them underneath, and I'm going to take the wire and turn it at 90 degrees, this time to 3 o'clock. Flip the design over and I'm going to look at where the tail is cut. What I want to do now is bring my round nose pliers in and create a loop which is approximately the same size as the one where we started. So I'm going to draw that all the way around, like so. Now, if you want your wrapped loops to be neat, where you've got two pieces of wire joining together, we need to do a bit of a hearty think. And with this one, for some reason, I can't get it to stay in my head which side the wire has to pass. So what I tend to do is create the loop shape, imaginarily, if that's a word, chase that wire all the way around and see if the cut end will intermeet with the other cut end. Intermeet is not a word either. It's Sunday morning. I'm going to just give that a bit of a squish to make that nice and tidy. Clench that loop shape, take the tail of the wire all the way around. So we're going to go once. This is going to be slightly longer on this end, I think. And then draw that tail into position. Take the correct side of my flush cutters and cut that away. And then you can draw those two cut ends together. And it really is just remembering to take a moment when you're cutting and when you're deciding where to draw that end to, making sure it will end up in the correct place. That's a little bit loose, but we can soon tighten that up and give that a bit of a squeeze to draw them neatly together. You will always have a side where that end is going to be visible, but in pushing them together it's a little bit less visible. So if I draw this back to the surface, make this the front, draw that coil neatly down together, you can see that that is less visible than if we were to just have two meeting ends on one side of the wire. Now if you want to, of course, you can play around with the shape of the feather just a little bit because we warmed the wire to begin with. You can flare that out a little bit more if you need to, if you need to straighten that loop up. One of the other things I did on my necklace that I made in this form is I arced them around slightly. Because they're such large connectors, it is indeed possible just to very, very gently just give an idea. And then if we take that loop at the bottom and twist it out to one side, you can see that then this would become part and parcel of a curving design. So I haven't put enough turns of the wire, so if we just tighten that up, it does then very, very gently arc around so that it'll sit on the collarbones rather than being very, very straight. The section down at the bottom is just a hammered feather as per one of my other tutorials, which I can pop you a link to if you want to make that very, very similar in technique, but instead of creating the loop at the bottom, you just start with a bent section of wire, just a deep V at the bottom before coming up, like so. So that drops down off the bottom, there's a little bead extender in there, rosary link sections, and then a graduating size of the feather connector. I hope that you've enjoyed the tutorial today. I look forward to being back with you again very, very soon. Have yourself a beautiful week. Bye for now.